Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Craig McInnes, co-CEO at MyCaribou. I'll be the moderator for today's session. MyCaribou, just a little bit of background for everyone, is a channel optimization platform that's built specifically for medical device manufacturers and distributors that will help you accelerate your growth through stronger partnerships. The platform itself allows you to match and connect with over 40,000 distributors and manufacturers in over 125 countries, to navigate market data from over 100 countries, as well as collaborate with existing and new partners in what we call workspaces, which allow you to do sales forecasting, file sharing, discussion threads, business reviews, and so on, and then monitoring and measuring your partner and market performance globally. You can join the platform for free using the link you're seeing on the screen right now. Angela will post this link into the chat as well, so everyone has access to it. You can sign up anytime you like, including during the call today if you like. It takes just a few minutes. So we're really excited to get started. Now, I will, at the end of this session, I'll do a brief demo for anyone that wants to stay on and see the platform. We've had pretty good response to that in the past, so I'll do it at the very end. We won't do that during the session today. But again, thank you for joining. I know people are continuing to come into the panel webinar as we speak. So let's get started. We did a previous panel a little while ago focused on finding, vetting, and selecting great partners. Again, Angela will post a link to the recording and the summary notes that are also available for that. So for today's session, let's assume that we have found the right partner as we discuss how contracts and key performance indicators can help create stronger, more successful partnerships and new and existing relationships. So that'll be the thesis for today's presentation. I do like to give a little background on who's attending. So we have hundreds of companies attending from over 50 countries on 6 continents. And I always like to look at the distribution between attendees that are manufacturers or OEM versus distributors, dealers, sales agents, and then other, which would be logistics providers, market consultants, regulatory consultants, and others would be in that. So you see a very nice distribution today. And as I mentioned, over 50 countries represented on the call. So I'm really looking forward to getting some questions from you as this session progresses. On that note, you'll find a Q&A panel in your Zoom bar where you can enter questions as we go. We will get to those towards the end of the presentation, but feel free to put those in as we go. It's actually helpful because we get a chance to read those before the end of the session and digest and order and prioritize them a little bit in terms of the right flow. So please feel free to do that as we move along. Now let me introduce the panelists today. So we have 3 fantastic panelists. First, Tim Emo, with over 25 years experience in the medtech industry. Tim is the Vice President, North America for UK-based medical products manufacturer Vernicare. Tim has full responsibility for strategic direction and daily operations of both the US and Canadian markets for Vernicare. Scott Newton has over 4 decades of success in international medical device markets with Hillrom, De Royal, CR Bard, and Cardinal Health, amongst others. Scott has built successful medtech channels around the globe from both a distributor and a manufacturer's perspective. And finally, Stéphane Toupin. Over the last 27 years, Stéphane has gained a wealth of experience in the medtech and pharmaceutical industries with AstraZeneca, BioVale, and Novo Nordisk. Stéphane founded Dawa Medical in 2015 to collaborate with foreign medtech manufacturers to enter and succeed in the massive US market. Dawa Medical is the United States initial importer and FDA agent with warehousing and distribution capabilities. Dawa Medical also offers services for the Canadian and Latin American markets. We will provide contact information for Tim, Scott, and Stéphane at the end of the discussion today. And again, just to reiterate, please enter questions in the Q&A panel as we go. Tim, Scott, Stéphane, thank you so much for joining us today. And let's get started. We have two main topics. The first is around contracts, contract management. And the second will focus more on key performance indicators and metrics. So starting off with contracts, which is a question we've had from many participants in previous webinars around contract management, setting up the right contracts and so on. So I'm going to start with Stéphane here. As initial importer in the US, you represent over 60 foreign manufacturers and work with dozens of distributors. What are the key terms in your contracts that ensure alignment with these partners?
Thank you, Greg. I think the list could be long, but what we are looking for usually when we sign a contract, either as a distributor or for the initial importer, obviously the term of the contract as a distributor is going to be exclusivity or not, what will be the territory that we be allowed to cover. Obviously the forecast, when are we going to do the business review planning? We're going to talk about the KPI later, but what about the insurance, pricing, the number of samples, payment term, term of delivery, what's going to happen regarding the termination clause in terms of acquisition or arbitration. So there's a lot of key important thing before starting to dance together that we need to agree on.
Okay, Tim, Scott.
I'll jump in on exclusive versus non-exclusive. I think that in any contract is probably the most the one that jumps off the page first. It really defines where the relationship is, what the relationship is intended to be from the front end. The commitments and targets are very important, given that as we further this discussion and we get into how we manage that and establishing expectations of the agreement. I'd like to say, however, that there's so much more involved in building a collaborative relationship between partners than just the contract. So as important as it is that there are key things to be considered, and you may from time to time go back to the contract. It's critical that when sitting down to discuss a contract, it starts in a collaborative tone as opposed to just a transactional relationship.
Yeah, I'd echo with what both Scott and Stefan mentioned. Stefan, the insurance, I think that's an area that people underlook, if that's right. That you need to make sure that that's in place so you have the coverage, particularly in the litigious U.S. market. The one area I'd also add, it's pretty obvious, you would think, but for both parties to ensure that the customer-facing teams are well educated on the products. Manufacturer provides the training on an ongoing basis as new joiners join the company, but as well the distributor maintains an adequate level of product knowledge for your products. It can get overlooked at times.
And I think before signing a contract on the manufacturing side, I think since we deal mainly with foreign manufacturing company, a lot of time people don't take the time to understand the U.S. market. They want to start selling in the U.S. and they have an idea of the U.S. market, and I will say that 80% of the time is wrong. Not totally wrong, but the foreign manufacturing company needs to take the time to understand the U.S. market, because if you don't do that, then the contract will be, there will some term in there that will not be good to put in place because it won't be aligned with what the U.S. market look like. So I always tell them, take the time to understand the U.S. market, because you could make big mistake if you don't.
When I think of the conversations and engagement that I've had around the world at major trade shows, how many manufacturers are out there just feeling if they have a contract signed with a distributor in some country that they've got the job done, and it's never done. It's just the foundation for establishing that the relationship, establishing the expectations, and to your point, Stefan, understanding that market is, how many times are you in a stage where the business is failing and the conversation is, well, you don't understand our market. Okay, well, let's do that on the front end.
Yeah.
I saw, I think there's a comment coming through in the chat about US manufacturers coming into the Canadian market. And certainly, being in Canada and sharing with my UK head office that when you come into Canada, it's not one homogeneous market. You have, call it 10, 13 individual provincial regional markets. And what happens in British Columbia will be radically different than what happens in Quebec from a procurement point of view, from a delivery point of view. And same, I'm sure you see in the US, Stéphane, whether it would be, on a regional basis on the West Coast or even with some of the big IDNs, and how you approach them versus others is different. So it's really understanding not just the initial level, but going down a few layers and really understanding it.
Yeah, so just sometimes I explained about the value analysis committee in different hospitals and how it could take 6 to 9 months just to get the product approved on a value analysis committee, and then there's other steps to follow. People they don't understand. They think that they're gonna arrive here in the market, in the US market, and in 6 months they're gonna sell a lot of the product. It's not. You need to be patient.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So let's move on to the second question. And Scott, I'll start with you on this one. So I know you've built global channels, again, both from the manufacturer side and from the distributor side. What are some of the terms to avoid in contracts from your perspective?
Sure. Navigating the potholes of the relationship from a contractual perspective is so important. I'll share a few things. Exclusivity and versus non-exclusivity is important. It sets the tone, but one thing to avoid is if it's not reciprocal. So for a manufacturer, granting exclusivity to a distributor, make sure it's reciprocal. Make sure you're as exclusive to them or they are as exclusive to you as you are to them. Distributors, be wary of volume commitments and stocking inventories. Often a manufacturer will feel that they've got their job done if they get you to buy stocking inventory. But that can be costly. So be very wary of that. Make sure that when you're talking about inventory levels and stock and buying sample products and whatnot, that it is part of your collaboration and that you are challenging the expectations. Excess inventory can be very damaging, especially if there's expiry dates on your inventory. And you don't want to get stuck with something and then the fingers start getting pointed that you didn't do the job, etc. So these are things to avoid. and I think it all boils down to ensuring that that you are speaking collaboratively and developing that relationship on the front end, and not just agreeing to terms and clauses in a contract to get the deal done. Yeah,
I agree that when I look at the contract and it's only one-sided, it's like, there's something wrong there for the long term, for sure. And I'm also very worried when lawyers start to get involved, because I know that's going to take forever, and they want to go and change the comma here and this and there, and sometimes do we really need to go there? That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think, Stéphane, one of the things that we've kind of identified at MyCaribou is how many relationships actually fail. That a high percentage of distributor manufacturer relationships do fail at a global level. They fail slowly. Do you feel that that it starts with the contract often?
Yeah, I have that impression. I do have an impression sometimes it starts there. And sometimes it's just because there's a misunderstanding, of the market, or or sometimes it's the distributor who just want to get a new product in his bag and doesn't fully understand that market also that he's getting into. So yeah, I tend to agree that sometimes it could start with the contract.
Yeah.
I think, if you look at how the relationship, starts, you meet at Medtech, or you meet at a conference, and it evolves. It starts on the commercial side, and sometimes we're all guilty of getting excited, and it's a new relationship. And we've got to make sure we've got alignment all the way back to the operation side. Scott, you mentioned excess inventory, and I've seen where you've got the commercial leads agreeing that, hey, we've got a relationship, and devil's in the details. But next thing you know, you've got the distributor ready to place an order, and things aren't aligning back with your production side. The order doesn't get shipped properly, and now commercial's dragged into, you're on your back foot starting off a relationship. So my advice is both sides. Make sure you've got alignment, make sure your operations side understands and they're on board. And maybe they're having some pre-calls ahead of time to get, your regulatory's talking, your logistics are talking, so they understand what a full pallet looks like and why it benefits both sides to order full pallets, those sorts of things.
And guys, I know we talked about this briefly prior to the webinar, but it is the paper that the contract is on, is it dictated by the manufacturer? Are they typically using their distribution agreement, or is it if it's a larger distributor, are they dictating the terms of the initial agreement that the manufacturer reviews, or is it something in between? Do you guys have comments on that?
Do you find, Stefan, you're dealing with a lot of contracts?
Well, and that's a good one because, if I take, us as an importer, initial importer, it's my agreement. You are in us, the manufacturer, as your initial importer. This is my agreement. You want to hire me. So sometimes we have conflict because people they'll send it to a lawyer and then they come back, they change all the clauses. No. This is my agreement. So we can change, some, minor stuff, but not the essence of the contract. But obviously, if I'm the distributor and I want to distribute one product from the manufacturing company, I say 95% of the time the agreement comes from the manufacturing company, and that's okay. And there's that dance where we can agree or disagree on some item, but at the end of the day, that's their agreement. And I think as a manufacturing company, you will have a standard agreement, but you will have to modify it, depending on the country or sometimes the states.
Okay. Sorry, Tim, you're gonna jump in?
Well, yeah, I think, obviously, there's a degree of power structure in the sense of the size between the manufacturer versus the distributor. So, obviously, Stefan, you can speak to some of the major prime vendor, med-surg distribution companies in the US, that depending on your product category, you're going to be hard to avoid working with, a Cardinal, an Owens, a Medline in certain areas. Certainly, years ago, when we got our first contract, GPO contract with Premier, new to it for us, and lo and behold, Premier basically joins you together to say, oh, by the way, you as a contracted manufacturer, you will sell through our contracted distributors. Thank you very much. So there are elements of that where you need to understand, okay, there's certain parties that we're gonna dance with, and other ones that we won't.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Let's move on to margin. This is a question that comes up on virtually every webinar we've done, and it's a bit of a hot topic. So why don't we start with Tim on this one? So Tim, as you built Vernicare's US and Canadian distribution network, how do you go about establishing distributor margins and then incorporating that back into your contracts?
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Traditionally, it's been driven by by what we're asking of the distributor. And so in certain cases, we may have a distributor that is providing logistics services, box movement, order to cash, and then we'll go up, up the value chain, and we'll work with distributors who will be our an extension of our sales force. They will be actively selling, converting, working with customers in the field. Obviously, with that, there's an expectation of a return on sales investment and a higher margin. So we look at things like that. Also, we look at the competitive position in the marketplace. So we sell a range of products, our infection prevention range and our surgical range, more niche, whereas our patient wipe portfolio, that's more of a commodity range in our markets. So our margin expectations are going to be less on areas like that. I'd also note that nothing is static. It's going to evolve over time as all of the products go through product life cycle, competition, they mature, different technologies evolve. How we I wouldn't say we have a formal mechanism, but what we would have is we have our acquisition costs to the distributor, and then we would typically have either agreed to list price ranges, or in certain cases where an RFP has been issued and we have won that contract, whether it be one of the US GPOs or one of the shared service organizations in Canada, we will bid that in consultation with our distributor and adjust margins accordingly where we need to. But we go into that with an understanding that it's a relationship and margins will evolve over time.
Yeah, I like the way that you and your company, Tim, understand and see that market, because yes, there's a lot of variation. And we don't talk very often about, yes, we're talking about distributor, but there's a lot of agent here in the US that are paid on commission. So they're not stocking distributor. And depending on the field of expertise, like in cardiovascular or radiology, they will take easily 25% commission. But in spine orthopedic, will look more 35% commission. If I'm a distributor and I work with sub-distributor or agent, I have to take that into consideration also. So if I'm buying, I'm stocking, and I'm going to work with agent, and I have to give them 25, 30%, well, I'm going to be looking for 50% margin for sure. So sometimes, depending, the field of expertise, the product, who you're talking to, that could be a cutoff somewhere. It's like, if I have to pay, the international shipping, which is between 5 and 10% of your margin now, it's all stuff that you need to take into consideration also.
Yeah, margins really do kind of define the relationship and the expectations. Any manufacturer is going to say, well, ideally, I'd like to sell direct and get all, the full gross margin, but that's not possible. So I'm going to use a distribution channel. But depending on the margins being offered that distributors, it depends on what you can expect. Like every manufacturer wants, to know and to get their share of wallet, as the saying goes, right? Which is their selling time from the distributor. But if you have to be offering the distributor the right margins, and there'll probably be some questions coming in today saying, what are those margins, and we can answer them when they come in later. But they need to be reasonable, fair to all, be market driven, and I'll just say that distributors inherently don't always want to share their margins. They don't really want to share their selling point. But I think it's arguable whether that is really going to facilitate the relationship that you want with your manufacturers. And I think there should be consideration given to a higher level of transparency, because markets change and there's fluctuation. And at the end of the day, I think to really establish, and what we're truly trying to accomplish is long-term sustainable partnerships. I think transparency is important, and that ability to communicate margin levels and margin expectations as part of your business reviews and your planning processes.
Tim, I know you recently posted on LinkedIn a post that mentioned inflation is here to stay over the coming years, and obviously that has an impact on pricing and on margins. Do you want to comment on that and how it relates to how you manage through that?
Yeah.
Easy question, right?
Yeah, it's a real challenge, and I'm Vernicare is a member of Medtech Canada, the Canadian Industry Association, and I've had conversations with them, and they've recently sent out a position paper, and it just shows how endemic it is. And same, Hyde has done the same. Manufacturers are getting hit over and over again, and we're getting hit by B2B suppliers that are industrial suppliers that are saying, hey, here you go, 20%, take it or leave it, and it's critical. And you have the conversations with them that say, well, that's great for you to do that, but I'm either on a public sector tender in Canada, or I'm on a fixed term GPO agreement in the US, and there's really no movement. You get some sympathy of, oh yeah, we understand, but I've not heard from a lot of manufacturers who've been successful in passing those increases on through the healthcare sector. So you have to have these conversations with your distribution partners that say, hey, look, whether it's a short-term surcharge or whether it's a price realignment, as you both try to move things forward on the end user side. But we've had conversations where we've looked at our margins and realized we're making less margin than our distributor, so we need to realign that for the benefit of the relationship in the short term, and then we both need to realign it in a second step going forward. So it's not going away. There's a lot of pain, a lot of creativity, but we are in regular conversations with all of our distributors, and we're as transparent as we can be because we value those relationships.
Excellent. This fourth question and last question on contracts is actually about a comment that was made in a previous panel session that fit nicely into this. So I'm going to try to launch this as a poll question. Hopefully everyone can see that right now. I haven't done the polls on this before, so I apologize. I'm hoping it's coming up on your screen right now. But the question is, if it actually came up from a former Cardinal Health executive who said, if you get to a point in the partner relationship where you have to pull the contract out for discussion, the relationship is probably over. And we're forcing you to agree or disagree on that, and then we'll let Scott, Tim, and Stefan jump in on this. So I'll leave that poll up for a second while we get started. So guys, jump in, whoever wants to address that first.
Well, I tend to disagree in the sense that it's like, if you just got married, and you realize that your wife for 3 weeks doesn't take the garbage out, and you say, that's it, we're done, I think there's more to that than just and especially, as a distributor, we can deal with many different manufacturing companies, let's say 10, we could have 10 different contracts. So it's not always easy to keep up with each of them. And if you do quarterly review with the manufacturing company and the distributor, it's stuff that you can, bring on and start a discussion if something is not aligned. But I don't think it's mean that the relationship is over. Not for me.
I would generally.
Sorry.
I would generally agree with Stefan that in terms of the marriage relationship and the garbage. The other thing I'd say is when in the relationship is the contract being pulled out and how frequently. So it's going to come out more frequently in the first year as people are understanding, okay, how do we work together versus distributor? You know, you may have different terms, you have made different processes. Obviously, you got some things that are standard, but again, I always find in the first 3 to 6 months, it's coming out as people are going, wait a sec, what's the rules here again? But it's 10 years into the relationship. If the contract's coming out then, that's a warning sign to me, because things have been going along for so long. Why is there a problem now? Why are we lawyering up, so to speak?
So I'll beg to differ a little. I mean, certainly there's a time when contracts need to come out on the table, and I think you've articulated that. And so I tend to agree with the statement that maybe it's not over, but it's certainly headed in the wrong direction, especially if it's a little farther down the road, as you said, Tim, because I think it challenges it. You know, usually when a contract comes out, there's some finger pointing going on that who either didn't understand it, who didn't hold up to their end of the bargain. And it lends itself to alignment. And Stefan, you referred to alignment. Are you aligned? And then if you're not aligned, what created the misalignment? So is it salvageable at that time? Yeah, who knows? Who knows? But are a lot of them dead at that point? I think so. I think
All right,
so.
well, let's share the audience results here. It was 27% agree, 73% disagree. My guess is if I had to put it depends in the middle of those two, we would have had a lot of it depends. That's kind of where we forced you one way or the other. You had to take a stand. So, okay, great. So let's move into the next topic, which is key performance indicators. And just to sort of set the stage for this, let me bring up the first question. So it just to be clear too, when we're talking about KPIs or key performance indicators, so let's define those loosely as metrics to manage, loosely I should say, as metrics to manage targets in the market that will ultimately drive sales. So if you think of sales numbers or revenue numbers as being trailing indicators, we would think of KPIs as leading indicators that should ultimately drive sales success. So let's start first. Scott, I'll go to you on this one. And again, I think you're uniquely qualified on this one, as you really have worked on both sides of the manufacturer-distributor relationship over the past decades with Hill-Rom, which obviously is now part of Baxter, C.R. Bard, Cardinal Health, and others. So why is it so important from your perspective to establish key performance indicators up front?
Well, this is this is near and dear to me. So KPIs clearly drive engagement between the parties. And I'll start by saying that often a contract, an agreement is developed between two people within two organizations that aren't that intimately involved with the execution. So it's one thing to have the best laid plans and to form that relationship and that marriage, but it needs to work, and you need expectations, you need execution, and you need involvement from multiple stakeholders. So without that, and I would think that most contracts, it's just assumed that we're going to work together, that we are going to communicate, that we're going to have a business review. But I really think that as important as KPIs are, I think you need to back in it right into the contract, that right from out of the gate, that you are discussing KPIs so that you can use key KPIs to establish those mutual expectations. And it's through having KPIs and through managing KPIs that I'm going to use the word collaborate, but you collaborate with your business partner, you have the reviews, and you get through it. And the most successful, I talk to a lot of people, and the most successful distribution companies that can speak to their top third suppliers, there are clear expectations that are being executed on. So don't leave that out on the front end, and ensure that that you have KPIs, and that you have tools that can manage those KPIs. That it's more than just something written on paper, that it's something that is managed on a regular basis between the appropriate stakeholders in the businesses. Don't fly blind.
Yeah, I was listening to your podcast, Greg, with Denis Quentin, and what was very interesting, and it's something that I never looked at that way, is you were saying something about, working with the distributor to define the KPI. So not just coming from the manufacturing company, but also, having that discussion with the distributors and trying to find KPI that will make sense for both. And we're talking about alignment, and so I think that's something interesting that I never went that way, but I will look into it for sure.
Yeah, so it's a good point. I should have mentioned, and maybe Angela, if you could post the link to that podcast in the chat, that'd be great. We did a fairly deep dive on about 7 or 8, 9 questions around KPIs. It was more of a one-on-one podcast. So we'll definitely post a link to that if anybody wants to watch it. Thanks for bringing that up, Stefan. I forgot about that. Thank you. Anybody else want to jump in on this one?
Just one last comment. Memories can be short.
Oh, gotcha.
So use KPIs to, stimulate and create communication and drive the business. It's huge. Brings to light those success factors that you need to succeed.
Okay, so let's talk about some specific KPIs, and Stefan, I'll start with you. What are some sample KPIs you've used with success? And again, you're in between manufacturers and distributors quite a bit, and so I think it's, again, very relevant for you. So
well, obviously with the field that we are invested with, there's a lot of value analysis committee need that, product needs to be submitted. So for me, it's one of the KPI. I say, how many, submission have we made year to date? How many trials that happen after that? How many conference or that the distributor or the manufacturing company will invest or participate into? And then obviously, the sales versus the target is one of them. But those one, will usually, bring the sales. The more submission you do with value analysis committee, the more trials, ends up with more buy-in from the hospital. So that's some of them.
And Tim, your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, we would break it down into two sides. You've got your operational side in terms of inventory on hand, back orders, turns, fill rates, forecasting in terms of accuracy. You want to get to that. You obviously have forecasts, but how do you improve on that? How do you make it more accurate so it's seamless and you're improving your production, your supply chain and whatnot. From there, we'd go into the sort of customer facing side that Stefan talked about in terms of conferences, introductions, conversions. And again, it's not just, putting a number down on a piece of paper or in a keyboard. It's understanding, okay, what's the quality here? And let's talk about that. So it comes back to the narrative and the discussion that follows from the data that you're both looking at.
Scott, any additional comments?
I think you can create a KPI to almost anything, but how do you create a tangible KPI out of an intangible? I think there's a challenge there. The intangible, I reference back to share of wallet. I mean, it's how do you really measure and establish a KPI around selling time, that your percentage of selling time, et cetera. So there's some challenges there to, not necessarily go in that route, but to find some KPIs that will allow you to manage the activity levels that you need to have managed as a manufacturer, with your distributor to succeed. So what are those success factors? And take some work, but it's worth it.
Yeah, and I think I was seeing a comment from Flavio about the KPI, saying that they only work with big player. If you start applying the KPI with small distributor, they will probably jump out of the partnership. And I tend to agree a little bit with that because we deal with a lot of small distributor or agent. And if you put too many KPI in there, they will kind of, okay, I represent already 5 or 6 different companies. Are you going to be on my back, every month to ask about how many physicians I saw, whatever? So you need to, yeah, I tend to agree a little bit with smaller distributor or agent in that sense.
Okay, we'll switch gears to tracking and managing. So Tim, why don't we start with you on this one? So as you know, I gave some background on Vernicare, but you've got a fairly robust line of products from wound care to continence and surgical products. How do you track and manage your KPIs today?
Yeah, similar to the earlier conversation, it's going to be a case by case understanding. So in terms of continence, in terms of wipes and our infection prevention line, where there's a lot more inventory turns, a lot more volume in the market, and the partners we use in those areas bring a lot to the table in terms of logistics. So, if I look at, Cardinal, for example, Cardinal puts out a really good supplier scorecard. And I've always admired it in the sense of, hey, it's transparent, but here's our information on you. Here's how many days on hand we have of your product. Here's how quickly your product is turning in our warehouses. That's great information to have. And then there's a conversation about that. And how do we move that forward? Yeah, there might be some excess, no move that you deal with. But from an operational point of view, in those categories, I really don't have anything to add because it works well in that case. In some of the others, it's evolving, but it's more of a spreadsheet design for now. We are clients of Caribou, and we are bringing that into our platform with our partners, where we look at customer engagements, we look at conversions, and we agree on how we're going to measure that on a monthly basis initially with some new partners, and then we evolved to go, we can move this to quarterly basis. And that's how we're approaching it.
Stefan, Scott? Yep, sorry.
Yeah, it's obviously if you have a quarterly meeting, that help to keep track. And if it's feasible, I strongly believe in more frequent interaction. It doesn't have to be always a web conference, but just a text or phone call, say how is it going, do you need us, do you need our help, is this something you can do? It makes these quarterly review, if I can say, more smooth, and nobody's surprised at a quarterly review if you have constant discussion with your people, with the distributor or the manufacturing company.
I think the only thing I'll say is that how a manufacturer is tracking information and how a distributor is tracking information can often be two different things, and I guess we've kind of covered the importance of of KPIs and tracking them and creating KPIs, but you need to see you need to have, as you say, quarterly reviews. You need to track them regularly. You need to have the complete picture, right? And information just shouldn't be one way. It needs to be part of the overall picture of both parties working on it.
Yeah, I mean, when I do the demo at the end, I will show how we're trying to change this with My Caribou, which is to put KPIs that are agreed upon between the partners, to track those together, and then also relate it to your sales forecast, obviously. But That's a shameless self-promotion, but I will show that in the demo, because we do think it is an area where agreeing on those, sharing them, managing them together is a real potential win for this. All right, last question on KPIs. I'm going to do this one through a poll as well. And this is near and dear to my heart because I've managed business development teams for 25 years. I have a very strong opinion on this one, but I'll let our panelists weigh in. So let me post this. It's, do you worry about KPIs when hitting sales targets? So the comment I've heard many times is we don't really need to worry about tracking KPIs if we're hitting our sales targets together. Do you agree or disagree? And again, we can't let you sit on the fence on this. Agree or disagree? All right, so who wants to chime in on this while the poll question is being answered?
Okay, I'll jump in. I do not agree. I disagree. I don't want to influence the people out there voting, but I think if you're hitting your sales targets, it's all the more reason to have KPIs to better understand what's going on out there. Are you exceeding expectations? And by not having a KPI review, you may be celebrating mediocrity. You may have misjudged the market. You may have misjudged the potential. So there's lots of things that may be wrong out there as a result of hitting your sales targets, if that makes sense. It may exposing things in the contract or in your activity levels that you missed. The other thing I'll say is that if you're measuring on a monthly basis, is what is that sales target, monthly or quarterly? That could be a one-off. It just could have been a spike in activity levels. So if you take your foot off the gas and not be monitoring through KPIs your activity levels, you may have missed something that will bite you hard the next quarter.
I mean, you bring up a good point, Scott, in terms of there might be something in the background. And we have a partner in Canada for our laparoscopy range, regular conversations. We've had phone calls, texts back and forth, and that there's effort being done as much as can be done. Obviously, we're just coming out of our most recent lockdown, and elective surgeries are just starting to come back, and that's where the products are used. So that it's basically a closed door, but the efforts are being made as much as they can. So you can't penalize your partner for not hitting a sales target when they're putting forth the effort that they are. So you got to look at those overall macro factors.
Yeah, I think I agree also that you don't want to be in a situation where all the sales of a distributor is coming from one account. And tomorrow, for some reason, they're not buying anymore from the distributor and sales goes down to zero. So I think you need to measure at least some KPIs to make sure that it's a long-term relationship, but also it's going to be just not putting all the eggs in one basket.
So let's share the results here. It was 28% agree, 72% disagree, and I appreciate all the comments there. And I know, from my background, I have managed business development teams for over 25 years, and some of the times I've been burned the most, and I've managed over 100 sales reps at any given time, was when I paid too much attention to how great our quarter was or how great our 6 months was, and lost sight of some of the KPIs. So that's my opinion weighing in, but appreciate the comments there. So let's move into question and answer here. So if you have any questions, please put them into the Q&A panel, and we'll go through those together. And then I have a few quick things to wrap up with afterwards, including a link to the free sign up for My Caribou. As I mentioned, after that, I'll also do I'll stay on and do a quick demo for anyone who's interested. So a couple of these, I'll try to order these in a meaningful way, but there's a question from participant about contractual obligations as a startup distributor. So what are some of the things to avoid as a startup distributor in terms of obligations and contracts? Any thoughts, guys? Any difference between startup versus, a distributor that's been in place for many years? Yeah.
I've got one. Beware of channel stuffing. Their manufacturer has to appease their shareholders or what have you, and just beware of overcommitting to stock levels and channel stuffing activities that may happen, that you may be confronted with.
So channel stuffing, meaning they're signing up distributors to meet some sort of quota, and they're not all that interested in having collaborative relationships.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So beware that you're not being used.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I think when you try, especially for a new product, a new company starting in the US, to forecast is very difficult. The first 2 years is difficult. You have no clue how it's going to go. So to force a distributor to buy a large amount of product, and depending on the number of SKU also you have for your product, could be a huge challenge for a distributor. So, and also you need to think about samples. Does the manufacturing company going to give you free sample? Do you have to pay for the sample? Are you getting a rebate? Or it's like you buy 2, I give you 1 for free. It's all stuff that you need to also to discuss with the manufacturing company, but I will be careful not to stock too much of the product for sure.
And also, I'm reinforcing what you said earlier, Stefan, is challenge that manufacturer. If you're a new distributor, challenge them on whether or not they really understand your market.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to be their guinea pig, and that you've got to do all the heavy lifting and the market investigation while you're trying to sell. You want to make sure the product's commercially viable. You want to make sure the regulatory is in place, et cetera, et cetera.
Great. And what about startup manufacturers? I mean, we know we've many, aggressively growing startup manufacturers on our platform looking for distribution. Any advice for them? The same situation where they're signing deals with established distributors, but they're fairly new in terms of the market, and just even startup company to begin with. On the manufacturing side, any comments, guys?
I'd educate yourself on channel fees and fees in general. There may be some distributor fees coming through, and then there's always GPO fees. So if you work yourself into getting a US contract or a Canadian contract, there's fees involved in that. Understanding that that needs to be factored into the margin equation, and your overall profitability. Something that comes to mind.
Okay.
Just one thing, and that was that manufacturer to really challenge that distributor on their call points. Call point synergies is really critical.
Yeah, and I will just want to add for the distributor to challenge the manufacturing company about if you get product, about the expiration date. Be very careful because you don't want to be stuck with a product that is going to expire in 6 months or even a year, and it's going to take you, 6 months to get approved on a value analysis committee. So take that into consideration for sure.
Scott's comment about call point synergies makes me think as well. You may not get all the details, but if you can understand the distributor commission plan, and where you could potentially fit into that, whether there's something dedicated to you as a new manufacturer they're bringing on board, or whether you're part of a broader bucket, where a rep in an area that you want to target can make his commission number with another product and never have to touch yours. So understanding where you fit in the priority of a distributor commission plan is important too.
Okay, I'm going to try to ask 1 or 2 more depending on time here, but and then I just want to mention everybody, we do send a summary afterwards. So if there are questions that we didn't get to, which we won't, we will answer those and send them in our follow-up, which will include a recording of the webinar a summary of the comments from today, as well as any answers to unanswered questions. But there's one here, a couple actually that are sort of similar around bonus schemes or bonus incentives in terms of KPIs and revenue targets with distributors. So have you worked with those where you attain certain levels, there's a bonus that kicks in as it relates to margin or additional compensation? So maybe let you guys comment on that if you've used any bonus schemes in the past with your revenue targets and KPIs.
No, we haven't.
Well, there's two things that we did in the past. For example, as a master distributor working with sub-distributor, sometimes we will put some contests, like, okay, if you sell, or if you open 5 new accounts, we're gonna give you a badge for one of the American Congress in your convention, for example. So little incentives for people. The other thing sometimes we will do is ask the manufacturing companies that to lower the transfer price every time that we hit a certain amount of volume. So we order the first 1,000 unit will be at that price, but after 1,000 to 2,000 is going, the transfer price is coming down. So it's kind of an incentive because at the end of the day I'm going to make more money as a distributor because my transfer price is lower. But that's about it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the questions, we've touched both. Is it volume discounts? Call that a bonus, or there's a rebate or something based on volumes. Yes, those can get carved into contracts for sure. But then there's a piece of wanting to bonus sales reps, or you're competing with other manufacturers for selling time, and I've seen that as well. So those can be offered to distributors to incentivize the sales force for the for a contest or what have you, as you referenced, Stefan.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. 2 quick slides for everyone. I know we're right up against it in the next couple of minutes here. So quickly, we have part 2 and part 3 of this series, April 12th, April 26th. So expansion on partnerships and collaborating through proactive relationships, sales expectations, and execution is part 3. If you register for today, which you obviously did because you're here, you will automatically be registered for those, but we'll send you a reminder to it. The other thing I just wanted to mention very quickly, we will send you a copy of the recording. We'll send you the notes. I did also promise up front though as well. Oh, by the way, so the questions that we didn't get to, which there were several, we will answer those and send it in the follow-up as well. Tim, Scott, and Stefan, thank you so much for doing this today. It's a big time commitment. I really appreciate it. I know our audience really appreciates these conversations. You can see that even in some of the chat where people are chiming in. Tim, Scott, and Stefan also agreed to provide their email addresses. So they're in the deck, which you'll get a copy of as well. And you can see on the screen currently. As I mentioned at the beginning as well, you are able to sign up for the MyCaribou platform. The link is there. It's in the chat as well. It's a very simple process. You can start accessing the platform for free. It's always free to have your company listed in there and respond to connection requests from other companies. So on that note, I want to thank you guys very much for your participation. And I will stay on. I'll do a quick 5 to 10 minute demo for anyone that wants to stay on. I know there are a lot of customers on the call today as well that already use the platform. But if you're interested in seeing a little bit further, I'll spend a few minutes just to show you what it looks like. And again, when you leave, you'll be able to sign up automatically for the platform today. So thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. And have a great rest of the day, everyone.